Mycorrhizae is key if we're going to grow milkweed or restore milkweed. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we did early on was created a propagation method. And I call that sprout harvesting. And it's a way, so when I first started, I would put seed in pots or on the ground, and I would use lots of time, money, resources trying to nurse these seeds along, or put one seed per pot. You know, if you look at the size of a milkweed on the ground, you would think that boy, that needs at least a gallon-sized pot, you know? So when I first started, I had these pots lined up in my backyard, and hundreds of them, and trying to see what conditions I needed for them to grow. And so if they didn't survive, I realized that I had used a lot of soil, a lot of materials like pots. So I can hear some feedback. If you would mute maybe. So in an effort to not waste all that time, money, and effort, and at the same time, I had students all across Texas, like middle school and some scouts who were, let's say, late elementary to early middle school age, trying to grow this as well. And so I needed to develop a way that was not very costly, and in a way that we could determine which seeds were viable and only spend time, money, and effort on those that could be grown. So I didn't want to try to plant a seed that was green, or that was sterile, or any number of other things that can happen to them. And so this is that process. It's an overview of that process, and I'll talk through it here. The first step is to collect and clean viable milkweed seed. If we don't have viable seed from the beginning, then nothing else that we do after is going to be successful. We must make sure that the seed we collect is right. That's the main, and so as an engineer, I look at this process as failure, at the failure modes of this process. And so as people began to tell me, and as I myself began to see the places where I lost plants or where this process failed, I documented those and began searching for and implementing solutions so that the greatest number of people could be successful at this. So this is not the only way to grow it, but this is kind of the way, based on hundreds of students and thousands of adults, that seem to work for most people. So start with viable milkweed seed, clean them so they're, you don't end up with moldy seeds to begin with. Then we prepare seeds for stratification. Some of the questions that came in prior to this meeting were around stratification. So I won't say that some seeds will not grow if you do not stratify. Certain species like Prairies will grow very well without stratification. However, understand that milkweed intends to send out its seed to many different places, and some of it will begin to grow this year, and some of it may grow next year. Some of it may go into the seed bank in the soil and not grow for several years. So stratification is the way we jumpstart the milkweed seed and make sure that they are all kind of marching to the same drummer, so they're all in the same time frame. We put vermiculite in a baggie, in a large baggie, And vermiculite is highlighted here because it is one of the key characteristics that I would say is part of the success. So there are other, I've seen sand and perlite recommended. Vermiculite is the perfect amount of absorption, but not too much water. It has the perfect number of edges to allow seed to medium or growing medium contact, and it just works best for us. So using horticultural vermiculite is one of the things that helped us guarantee success here. We place several cups of vermiculite in a baggie, and then we put the seeds in the dry vermiculite, shake to distribute, and then we moisten that vermiculite. I usually pour in a little extra and then wait a couple of hours and pour off any excess. Then, say at the end of the evening, after the vermiculite has had time to soak in that water, it goes into the refrigerator to stratify. And I say refrigerator because some people have put it in the freezer, and with varying success. I did not have success with anything that has come from anybody's freezer. So we want to simulate winter. 6 weeks is going to give you the greatest number of, or the greatest percent of seed. So if you do it less than 6 weeks, let's say that you do it for 3 weeks, then you may have less than, say, the 95% germination rate that we usually get with this process. So stratifying for 6 weeks is part of what guarantees the greatest number, or has produced the greatest number of seedlings for us. Next, we're going to sprout the seed. We're going to take that baggie of seeds out of our refrigerator, and we're going to dump that vermiculite into foil trays or some other 2 to 4 inch container. I use foil trays with lids because they're then disposable. I don't have to worry about, you know, if I run into some disease or bacteria or fungus, you know, I've thrown that away, and I'm not going to contaminate anything else with it. But there's plenty of other containers. Some of the people I'm going to tell you about tonight use salad containers, the plastic containers we find salad in at like the grocery store or Sam's or Costco. And within a few days of putting the sprouts in that tray, you're going to begin seeing little sprouts. And I would say that wait about 10 days and see how many you have left. Usually at the 10 to 14 day mark, most of the seeds in there have sprouted. If there is an odd seed that hasn't, we just we keep it, we don't throw it away. And then I put those in a particular location, and often we'll see some of those seeds bloom or grow later.
Barbara, we've got a couple of questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
Lisa's asking, where do you get ProMix?
ProMix is a professional greenhouse material. It is available sometimes at some of the local nurseries here in the Houston area. Enchanted Garden, I guess that's Richmond maybe, has it. Some of the Walmarts have it. There is a list of locations that I could provide later.
Okay, that'd be great. And Jamie's asking, what time of year would you start this whole process?
That's a great question. So it really depends on when you want to plant your milkweed and whether you intend to grow it for a long period. I have found that we grow and donate a lot of milkweed for restoration projects. And we grow those I keep them for just under 2 years. And then I find that when I put them out in a field, like where there's no irrigation or anything like that, that those plants, they almost never die. They're usually, you know, at that age, they usually do very well in our Texas weather, and we plant them in December. And so if you want to plant something in that December to January timeframe, and I would say that's the best time of year here, then you want to either start them about this time in September, so that you could plant a seedling. Or if you are the kind of person who prefers to grow them longer and keep them for the winter and plant them in the spring, they would also be okay then. So September is a good time. We also have several groups that start the seeds, or start stratifying seeds right after Christmas. And if they start growing them then, by April or May, they have plants that could go in the ground. They have seedlings that could go in the ground. I don't recommend growing on any timetable that's going to produce plants in the middle of summer, because the watering is intense, and the success rate of planting in that time frame in our hot summers is not good.
Thanks, Barbara.
Mm-hmm. So we've just gone through sprouting the seeds. We have them in a foil container, and I have some pictures that I'm going to show this next, but I like to talk through this kind of as an overview first. Next, so another of the questions that was forwarded to me from your attendees was, what do I put the seedlings in? What do I plant them in? So we sprout them. They are tiny, and we use 8-ounce or 16-ounce plastic cups to plant our milkweed. And this came about when I first started. I was using all the, the gallon pots and all the nursery paraphernalia, because I wanted to be taken seriously, and I wanted to use what nurseries were using. But I had a Girl Scout who did a calculation that showed me, after growing milkweed, she actually did a science project, and she determined that the roots in a solo cup, so she used the red solo cup, the roots did not go to the outside of the cup. And if we're growing it as a seedling, it also didn't reach the bottom. The taproot did not reach the bottom of the cup. So for a seedling, a solo cup is a perfect way for our students and somebody who doesn't have a lot of space, or doesn't want to invest in all the pots and everything else, to grow, taking the least amount of space, the least amount of cost, etc. So I have kids all across Texas who we give ProMix and we give seeds and allow them to grow milkweed in these plastic cups. And some now use the 16-ounce clear plastic cups. There's a local Facebook group that can help with the propagation process, and they use the large plastic cups as well. But the plastic cups were determined to be what the milkweed needs. And so because I was working with a lot of students, I decided that I would use the cups for my own use. And so when I go out to teach this, I take milkweed in clear plastic cups to show kids and adults what they should do. I guess the other thing, now that we're at this point, we're going to plant little tiny seedlings. So if you could imagine alfalfa sprouts at your grocery store, that is the size that we're dealing with here. So that means that we see something, we know which one of these seeds are going to sprout, we know which ones are going to produce a plant if we can give it what it needs. And so we drill drain holes in those plastic cups, we fill them with pro-mix, and then we plant that little sprout in the cup. Because it is a tiny sprout, we bottom water. So that means that, you know, the other thing that happens with the plastic cups is you could put maybe 20 or so in a plastic bin and easily water them by just pouring water into the bottom of the bin, or carry them around if you need to. So kids who are in school have used the bins, and so bottom watering in these plastic bins is easy for them. One of the other, so I said mycorrhizae was kind of the key for me to growing milkweed. The other thing that I learned was that the soil has to stay consistently moist throughout the time that you're growing this seedling. Consistently moist is a product of where you sit it. So the temperature of whatever you're sitting it on, if you sit it on the cement, that's obviously going to be hotter than if you sit it on the soil. If you use a small cup versus a large pot, the time between waterings is going to be shorter. And especially if you have that cup sitting on a patio, then you may have to water more frequently. But whatever you decide to plant it in, you must ensure that the soil is consistently moist. If you allow it to dry out, that seedling is probably going to be gone. And because it's so tender, it responds best to bottom watering. So if we were to spray those little tiny seedlings with a hose, you know, we could break them, or at a minimum, wash them out of their cup that we just planted them in. But we do not allow them to sit in water 24/7. So in an effort to avoid maybe allowing something to go dry, some people err on the side of filling the bin with water and allowing their cups to sit in it. And that is not acceptable either, because that is going to leach the things out of the soil that it needs, and potentially cause root rot and other things in that plant. And then after we've done all this, we're going to transplant the seedling to a permanent location. So we're going to look for most of the milkweeds, and there are some exceptions, but most of our milkweeds are looking for full sun. They don't want to sit in the understory of, say, an Indian grass or another tall plant. They want spring moisture. So a lot of them enjoy even up to wet feet in the spring occasionally. They're looking for soil with healthy nutrients, and the key here is active mycorrhizae. If you have other plants growing in this area, you probably have good mycorrhizae. But if you plant in a place that doesn't have the mycorrhizae, unless the mycorrhizae that you've added as a seedling you know, this plant may not do well or it may not be sustained. And
Barbara, speaking of mycorrhizae, you have two questions regarding the mycorrhizae. One from Cynthia about obtaining native mycorrhizae, and from Sean asking how to determine if the soil has mycorrhizae.
So about 80% of the plants, of our native plants, are mycorrhizae obligate. So there are lots and lots of places where there is mycorrhizae. When I first started this process, I went and I bought ProMix. It has mycorrhizae in it. I didn't realize the significance of that when I first started using ProMix. And then I also used Dr. Earth, which had a variety of, it had all the mycorrhizaes. The problem with that was that the mycorrhizaes in Dr. Earth are from the northern United States. So they're not native Texas mycorrhizae. Some of them may be, you know, some of them may be in both places. But as I walked along this path, I learned that Texas mycorrhizae would probably be better. And so we do mycorrhizae nurseries. We actually grow it and cut it up, and then you can put it in water. You can put a little, you know, half-inch piece of it in the bottom of a hole when you plant it. That's one of the things we do. And the way we do that is a mycorrhizae nursery, which I'll show you later in this presentation. And then the other part of it is, again, that we measure sustainability or success of this propagation method by the number of years that milkweed survives in the habitat. And so this is what actually drove me to the whole mycorrhizae discovery, because at one year I grew 300 plants, and I gave them to any teachers, nursery schools, places like that that asked for them. And then a couple years later, I went back hoping to collect some seed pods. And to my surprise, a lot of them were no longer alive at the sites where I had given them. And so then I realized that if we are going to help the monarch by providing more milkweed, then I had to be able to make sure that it was going to be sustained. Next slide, please. So now this is just more of a visual of the process. So we're putting vermiculite in baggies. And again, I'm trying to use products that your average student might find at home, so that this is not an intimidating process. When I began this, a lot of us, you know, we adults were intimidated by this process because there weren't many success examples out there, you know, back in 2009 and 2010. So we try to use things that people are going to find at home. And often if I can say, well, this classroom of fourth graders grew, you know, 50 plants, then if there is somebody who's still intimidated by growing milkweed, that often helps them think that they could do it too. So we put vermiculite in baggies and put that in the refrigerator. Then we're going to dump it out into foil pans. And in this foil pan, you can see little sprouts that are, you know, the seed is beginning to sprout. And I've taken the lid off of here, obviously, to take this picture. But that is what your sprouts will look like. And then this next picture is not mine, but it's a picture of the cups and, you know, people using this process and growing the native milkweed in the cups, in the 18-ounce cups, I think these are. And then to the right, I want you to see the tap roots. This is a tuberosa, and the tap roots are The one on the left is 6 weeks old, and the one on the right is 12 weeks old. And you can't, I should have had something here to measure, to show context in terms of inches, but the 12-week-old one actually has roots that, had I put this in a plug tray or a short pot, you know, those roots would already be bound in the bottom of that pot. So the tap roots grow pretty quickly. You can see the difference in diameter between 6 and 12 weeks. And by the time you're ready to plant a seedling, after say 4 months of growing it, you're going to have a taproot that is maybe the diameter of a pencil. Next slide, please. So lots of people ask me about starting groups, growing groups to get help with growing milkweed. And you know, I travel and I give classes, and I can't always help everybody that asks for it. But I do participate in these 2 Facebook groups, which use the Monarch Gateway's sprout harvesting propagation method. And you can see that there's pictures. They start at planned intervals. So they start these times that I've talked about that are best to start your plants if you want to plant them for winter, start growing if you want to plant them in spring. They will have classes going on during those times where a whole group of people will start the process on the same date. Sometimes I even provide seed to these groups or other materials, but it will be a group of people that will start, they'll talk and be able to coach one another, help one another, answer questions, and you know, at probably 3 intervals per year. So you're welcome, they're closed Facebook groups, but you're welcome to participate in those if you wish. And then occasionally I have some going on, usually the students, the high school and middle school students, I'm usually guiding those myself, but I often have classes in a particular city or school district where groups of people will grow milkweed all at the same time. Next slide, please. So these are some of the species, milkweed species that are available in this HNPAT region loosely. Asperula is included. So asperula is probably something you're not going to find in coastal Texas, but you might find it once you go west to Katy and a little further northwest of there. So remember, those are the 2 that DNA testing showed that the majority of milkweed, or the majority of Monarch, use those 2. So when we're thinking about doing restoration, or we're thinking about what to put in our gardens, and also what can be available on the dates that the Monarch migrate through, Viridis and Asperula are 2 of the earliest species to come above ground and be available to the Monarch in the spring. This year, as I mentioned, the Monarch arrived mid-March, or maybe the 3rd week of March, and there were caterpillars in March. And these 2 plants were just beginning to peek out above ground in some cases. And many of the rest of these you couldn't see them yet. Now, perennis is something that you can see year round, but it has dark red leaves, and the Monarch probably isn't going to find those leaves in the spring most attractive. And some of the rest of these are going to come up after the migration or will be summer blooming. So they come up out of the ground later. The number that you see at the bottom is the cardinalide value. Cardinalide value is important when we're planning to create habitat for monarch because just like mycorrhizae, cardinalide value is important to the butterfly. So a butterfly that is infected with OE will gravitate toward laying its eggs on plants that are high cardinalide value. Notice that tuberosa is nearly 0. The monarch will lay eggs on tuberosa. They like it just fine, but if we were to create all of our habitat with just tuberosa, then we run the risk of not providing the toxicity that the monarch is looking for when they eat, or the caterpillars are looking for when they eat the leaves of these plants. So Asperula and Viridis are early spring, and most of the rest of these are more summer. Next slide, please. And so one of the questions forwarded to me for this presentation was about OE. And I apologize to those of you who have heard me talk many times, because I sometimes feel like everybody's heard this, but we do have people who are requesting and asking this question. So this slide shows us the life cycle of the monarch butterfly on the outside and the life cycle of the OE protozoan on the inside. So the monarch butterfly carries the OE, Ophrysistis electrochera protozoan, on its abdomen. And as it flies around the milkweed, it kind of spirals around the milkweed, it might drop some of those protozoan onto the plant, or when it lays its egg, it creates a sticky substance that is designed to allow the egg to stick to a leaf. And so if there's OE spores there, or OE protozoan there, then that's going to stick to that sticky substance. And then when the caterpillar eats its way out of the egg, it is going to consume that protozoan. The protozoan is dormant until it gets into the caterpillar's stomach, at which point, depending upon how much it's eaten and what was the load of the female that laid it, that caterpillar may have lots of trouble or it may have little trouble. But one of the first things we notice is that one that's infected cannot form a J to begin the process of creating a chrysalis. Some of them get past that and are able to form a chrysalis, but the chrysalis isn't viable. The butterfly never really develops inside there. And then others come out with the wrinkled wings. So every year I get many calls asking, what do we do about a butterfly that has crinkled wings? Well, there are some situations where that happens without OE, but many times OE is the culprit. OE also affects the feet of the butterfly. So butterflies detect nectar by using the pads on their feet, and sometimes the toe pieces or the pads are missing. Sometimes the proboscis, which is in 2 parts when the monarch emerges from or ecloses from its chrysalis, and it has to put those 2 pieces together. And sometimes OE causes them to be malformed so that it can't get them together, and therefore it's never going to be able to eat in its lifetime. So there are some symptoms that we can see and some that we cannot. Next slide, please. This slide just tells us that the rate of OE has been continuous for many decades in areas where the monarch overwinter, where they live all winter. So Florida, that green dot, the green graph is, or the green line is the rate of infected in Florida. But you can see that in general, within the migratory population, this stays steady. Next slide, please. And so what can we do? So this is another question that was submitted to me from people from some of the attendees here. So this is a recommendation from the University of Georgia, who did some studies here, 2015 maybe. And they asked us to not stop buying and planting and growing tropical milkweed, because that's all that was available at that time. But they asked that we cut it back and try to avoid winter breeding by cutting back our tropical milkweed, because unless we have a freeze, this plant is going to survive all winter long. And if you have an OE, so most often when a monarch decides not to migrate to Mexico, scientists believe that that monarch is probably infected with OE and it falls out of the monarch migration and decides to just live here year round and continue or live here through the winter, and it continues mating, laying eggs, and then then the next generation will be born. And unless we get a freeze, you could have several generations born in the winter, as happened this year. So we cut them back. Now, some people say that if they cut them back to 6 inches, as recommended here, that they lose their milkweed. I've not really found that to be true, but if you believe that that's true, you could, cut them back to 9 or 12 inches instead. We're here in this area, we're all going to encounter the same thing. After you cut back your tropical milkweed in the fall, within about 2 weeks, if we have our normal weather, you're going to have leaves growing again. And so it becomes a process of not allowing the leaves to continue to grow, or but the monarch, if they need a place, they'll even lay them on the stems. So I sometimes recommend just taking tropical in, treating it like it's an annual. Certain years when I was studying this, sometimes put it in the garage. Anyway, the recommendation is that we cut it back in the fall. So you could do this at one point in the fall. Some people want to do it before the monarch migrate in the fall. And they cut it back around October. Others cut it back in November, December. And then still others put if they have multiple tropical milkweed, they put it on a rotation and cut some of it in 1 month, cut some 2 months later, and so on, so that they always have some milkweed, some tropical milkweed available. But we, in general, we grow native milkweed as opposed to the tropical. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a really complex slide, and I could talk about this one thing for a very long time. But before we move on here, I did want to just introduce the concept of everything that I've learned about milkweed at the cellular level, at the individual milkweed plant level. And the things that I've learned there are that milkweed begins to need or to want and reach out for mycorrhizae at 10 days old. Monarch infected with OE can decrease their OE level when they select high cardinalide milkweed but also when it has been grown with mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae changes the molecular structure of a leaf and feeds, kind of medicates that monarch butterfly. And so all of these things that we learn about one individual plant at the cellular level is probably a nested benefit at the next level. So in the plant's physiology, the way it, some plants send a substance to when it's being attacked by a predator, when it's being eaten down. So the cardena, or the latex substance in milkweed, the white substance, is actually that. It's a physiological response to predators or things that are eating the milkweed. And so while that happens at one plant level, you know, when you have all of these plants in the community, they begin to work together. And mycorrhizae, scientists have found that mycorrhizae pathways are connected, and communication signals travel that connection and help entire plant communities and even ecosystems be healthier, prevent infestation of invasive species, or whether they be plants or, you know, predators, things that want to eat the plants. And so there's not a lot of, or let's say mycorrhizae studies have not reached their peak. There's a lot more that we have to learn. And one of the things I'm going to tell you when we get to the slide about the landscape level is that trying to do prairie restoration, I saw the impact of mycorrhizae during a restoration. So I can tell you personally that I've seen it be important. I've seen single plants thrive because there was only one particular kind of mycorrhizae planted and things like this. So in general, we want to save the mycorrhizae of prairies that we lose. We want to get a sample of that and grow that mycorrhizae. We want to have different species or different types of mycorrhizae in our ecosystems, and those mycorrhizae help drive the entire plant community and even animals and other things by virtue of the plants that they allow to grow. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of Brazos Bend State Park, and there's goldenrod there. So mycorrhizae can be, you can have many mycorrhizae that kind of work like a symphony, allowing a variety of plants to grow, or you can have an overgrowth of a certain type of mycorrhizae called a specialist that communicates with the soil to ensure that more of the mycorrhizae that is compatible with the goldenrod grows. For those of you who have been to Nash Prairie, the coneflower meander at Nash is another example of that. So it's a location where only coneflower, Texas coneflower, is growing, and it grows there because the mycorrhizae there is different, and it is specific to that plant. If I move over in the opposite direction of the meander, the coneflower meander, where there's viridis growing at Nash Prairie, I haven't taken core samples in that location, but I did take a core sample where viridis was growing out along the road, and it was different. I suspect that it was different, that viridis was growing in a different type of mycorrhizae as well. So there's a lot that we have to learn. And there's one study that showed that within 2 hours of planting goldenrod or one of these specialist plants in the ground, it began communicating to ensure that more of the mycorrhizae that was compatible with its growth reproduce in the soil. And that's just fascinating to me. Next slide, please. And so I like to say that the combination of milkweed, growing milkweed, being interested in growing milkweed, and my involvement over the years with HNPAT and learning about different prairies, seeing Nash Prairie, seeing some of the places with the Nature Conservancy. I like to say that the combination of that was kind of like the rabbit hole that took me down this path of restoration of both prairie and milkweed. And it has been a really different kind of learning. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I thought I would be looking at a conference about mycorrhizae, or if I would be sitting here telling you all this stuff about growing milkweed, and I would never have thought that this was the path that I would have been at this point. But here I am, and now, like that rabbit hole that you see there, I think I've fallen in and I've gone deep. Next slide, please. So this is my own Blackland Prairie, and we have partnered with NRCS to set aside 92 acres, and everything we do on this 92 acres, so we're doing Blackland Prairie restoration, and we're also doing pollinator friendly land maintenance. So all the things that landowners can receive NRCS money for, or Texas Parks and Wildlife money to do, we're doing here. This will become a site where landowners can come and visit, and we'll be doing everything from stream stabilization to controlled burns. There's a video diary of the work that's been done at this property so far. Things like mesquite removal, and something really interesting that I found here I've been doing this for several years now, and we divided it into quadrants, and we have one quadrant that we grew a species or a type of mycorrhizae and put over an area, and there were some other plants, but the predominant plant that came up after we put this mycorrhizae in the patch was prairie parsley. Now that's one that grows easily, but it was visibly the plant that was dominant after that application of native mycorrhizae. And so we have this set up. We have students, we have Texas A&M, and some other groups that are working with us on the restorations. And everything we do here is set up in a research manner so that people can look at it and determine whether something that we did contributed to the success or the failure of restoration there. Next slide, please. And so there was a question, I said we'd come to it here at the end, and that was about native mycorrhizae. So if I say that when I started, I thought it was okay to buy a bag of Dr. Earth, and I do still recommend that because to some people, because you know, if you have a backyard in a city and you're doing a lot of the normal things we do in cities and subdivisions, it's probably not the ends of the earth if you use Dr. Earth with its wide variety of northern mycorrhizae species. But if you are trying to do a large landscape project, then you know, those different species, or those different mycorrhizae, depending upon which one becomes dominant and which one conditions allow to grow best could contribute to the success or failure of your restoration. And so what we do here is we dig these trenches, we grow, we fill them with dirt, and we take a core sample of soil from beside I'll say Indian grass. So at my property, a section of it is being restored. We had a patch that had grown of, say, 8 Indian grass. And so we took a core sample from beside the roots of that, and from that we used it to grow native mycorrhizae. And so you grow it, and then after about 4 months, you're able to harvest it. And so when we give out Monarch Gateway mycorrhizae, or sometimes we do little bags of soil and additives, it usually contains native mycorrhizae. So I don't have enough of it to give it to everybody, but we also have students who have started growing mycorrhizae so that we can see how how students can replicate this process to see whether they can be as successful at this as they were with the milkweed. And I intend to continue down this path of growing native mycorrhizae for all across our Texas regions, the appropriate mycorrhizae for the appropriate region and soil type. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation, and I would just invite all of you, especially if you're landowners or you have a green thumb, you're a gardener who's interested in growing milkweed, to try your hand at this process. If you're a landowner, think about adding milkweed to whatever other plants and restoration you have going on. And you could talk to many of your very knowledgeable people within HNPAT or us at Monarch Gateway about creating habitat for all of the native species here in Texas that need it. Thank you.
Barbara, we have a couple of questions in the chat that
Okay.
are pending response. 2 people asked about the rocks in the trench on your prior slide. What purpose they serve, the stones at the bottom of the trench?
So that is a contained, I keep water and drainage out of there. So we're laying down rock, and then we're laying soil, and then we're putting the mycorrhizae down, and we're planting a legume plant. And so I need that, the purpose of the rock is for drainage. The purpose of the trench is to keep a contained area, based on however much mycorrhizae we want to grow. And it doesn't take a lot. It takes very little in the way of trench to create a lot of mycorrhizae.
Okay, and you had that slide that had the numbers for the different varieties of milkweed.
Yes.
And Noreen Hort is asking about the number for Onothorides, if I'm saying that correctly.
Okay. Hello. So those numbers came from research studies. So everything that I tend to put in the presentations that I do, besides the things that I've learned myself, I tend to come from research projects that are out there that I've asked if I could share information from. And all the cardinalide values, that is dried, the amount of dried cardinalide per some measure of weight of dried plant. And so all of those numbers have come from research projects. And Oanthoroides is not one that I have been able to find. So I don't know what the cardinalide value is of that plant. And rather than assuming something, I am, again, only posting it if if there's been a research project that I can be certain that has been measured correctly.
Okay, and final question. Babette has a specific question about her plant. She said she has a milkweed plant that starts growing fine, and then the leaves get black spots and turn yellow and drop off. And I guess she's looking for any suggestions or ideas why that might be happening.
Okay, so without having known the value of it when I first started this, using ProMix, not only does it have mycorrhizae in it, but it also has other beneficial things that help avoid bacteria and fungi, bad fungi, and wither, black, different plant diseases. So when you talk about the dots, and I've found that when we're trying to grow plants in our yards or in our homes, we have a lot of water usually, and even if it's not you or your neighbor could have a sprinkler system, and there tends to be a lot of different diseases that the milkweed, which is accustomed to a drier environment, at least most of the year. Now again, it seeks wet in the spring, but then the remainder of the year, there's often, it's often really, really dry. And so when we put those plants into our neighborhoods with partial shade, irrigation, rain that moves back and forth between the yards and it's very wet, then there's often bacteria or different kinds of fungi that create those different diseases. I have a list of something else I will post as an addendum to this presentation is a chart that shows different kinds of milkweed diseases or conditions that I have found solutions to. So it's a chart that I'll just allow to be posted with this presentation for anybody who wants it.
Great, Barbara, thanks so very much.
I'm seeing one more question. Can I answer one more?
Yes, absolutely. If you've got time for us, absolutely.
Okay, so the question was, in ProMix, how does it provide mycorrhizae, which is a good fungi, and also have a fungicide that kills things like, let's say, Fusarium. So it has the different strains or species or different kinds of mycorrhizae, and they all have different roles. I took a Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center once did a project, and they had milkweed that they had some root rot, and I brought a piece of milkweed taproot that was mushy, and there was only maybe a ½ inch of it that was solid. And when I got home from Austin, I kind of threw it aside and figured the next day, because I got home late, I figured the next day I would work on it. Well, I didn't get to it that next day. But by Sunday, when I did get to it, it didn't look mushy anymore, or some of the bottom mush had disappeared and it looked better somehow. And so that ProMix, I don't know the science of it all, but I do know that it has different things in it that prevent certain kinds of bad fungi and bacteria. And then it has the kind of the freeze-dried mycorrhizae. And I think the way it's able to do both is that the mycorrhizae is dormant, and when you begin adding water, ProMix comes in a bale, and it's shaped like a bale, and you have to dig into it to break that bale. And so the mycorrhizae is dormant and doesn't come alive until you start adding water to it. And so I think that's the key. And I'd also like to say, just in conclusion, that ProMix is not the only soil that is able to, that you're able to grow milkweed in. I'm sure that there are others. It's just that that brand and that particular mix has so many ingredients in it that have helped many new people to milkweed growth that I would not change it, from what we do right now. I would not change the brand. So we know it works. Okay.
Thank you so very much. This was really informative. We've had a number of requests for the slides and the everything else. So obviously people are very interested and couldn't take notes quite fast enough. So we're grateful that you're going to allow us to post it on our website. And thank you so much for your support of the Prairies and your mission, your milkweed mission.
You are very welcome. Thank you all for having me. And please feel free to contact me if you have milkweed questions in the future.
Thanks, Barbara. Good night, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Good night.